For over 60 years the world believed the Alcatraz escape was an unsolvable mystery. Until now. In 2025, scientists uncovered something beneath the San Francisco Bay that changes everything we thought we knew. No more theories. No more speculation. What they found finally answers the question that's haunted investigators, historians, and conspiracy theorists for decades: did they survive? The truth behind the most daring prison break in U.S. history has finally come to light, and it's far more disturbing than anyone imagined. Scientists finally solved the Alcatraz escape mystery in 2025. But what they discovered might have been better left buried. The impossible prison break. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a warning. Built on a lonely island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay, it stood like a fortress surrounded by dark, freezing water and treacherous currents. It was where the U.S. government sent men it couldn't contain anywhere else. Escape artists, mob bosses, career criminals who always found a way out. On Alcatraz, they were supposed to run out of options. And yet, in the early hours of June 12, 1962, 3 prisoners vanished. Frank Morris was known for his intelligence, reportedly with an IQ in the top 2%. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, were seasoned bank robbers with a history of escape attempts. Together, they pulled off what is still considered one of the most audacious prison breaks in U.S. history. They didn't climb over fences or overpower guards. Instead, they disappeared like ghosts. It started with a hole, one carefully chipped into the back wall of each of their cells using spoons, scrap metal, and a makeshift drill. Each night after lights out, they'd work for hours, hiding the sound with accordion music and plugging the holes with cardboard. Behind the walls was a utility corridor that led to a locked area on the roof. Once inside, they used stolen raincoats, over 50 in total, to build a makeshift raft and life vests. Even the adhesive was homemade, created from heat and prison-used materials. To fool the guards, they sculpted dummy heads from a mixture of soap, concrete dust, and toilet paper. Real hair from the prison barber shop gave them an eerily lifelike appearance. When the guards did their nightly checks, everything appeared normal. It wasn't until the following morning that the deception was uncovered, and by then, the men were long gone. The escape triggered a massive search. FBI agents, Coast Guard ships, helicopters, and local law enforcement scoured the bay and surrounding areas. They found pieces of the raft, a makeshift paddle, and a few personal belongings floating near Angel Island. But no bodies. The official conclusion: they drowned in the frigid water before they ever reached land. But that conclusion never sat right with everyone. Over the years, stories surfaced, stories that refused to die. The Anglin family claimed to receive unsigned Christmas cards. A photograph emerged in the 1970s allegedly showing the brothers living quietly in Brazil. Their mother received flowers every Mother's Day, sent anonymously. And in 2018, a mysterious letter arrived at a police station claiming to be from John Anglin. In it, he claimed that all 3 had survived, that Frank had died in 2008, Clarence in 2011, and that he himself was dying of cancer. The FBI tested it. The results were predictably inconclusive. And so the legend persisted. Had they made it? Had they drowned? Did someone help them? Was the FBI hiding the truth out of embarrassment? Theories flourished. Books were written. Movies dramatized the escape. But the mystery was never solved, or so we thought. Because now, in 2025, something has surfaced. Literally. Not another rumor. Not a blurry photo. Something real. Something physical. And something the authorities can no longer ignore. It began with a survey. A scan. A strange reading beneath the bay. And then, something was recovered. The details are still unfolding, but what scientists and investigators found may finally answer the question that has haunted Alcatraz for more than 60 years: did they survive? The truth is out there now, and it may be far more shocking than anyone ever expected. The Alcatraz mystery wasn't buried forever, it was just waiting to be found. Theories, sightings, and hoaxes, in the years following the escape, Alcatraz became less of a prison and more of a legend. Tour guides recited the tale like folklore, and visitors from around the world stared across the water wondering if three men really beat the system. The official story was that they drowned. That was the version printed in newspapers, repeated by the FBI, and accepted by anyone who needed closure. But beneath the surface, much like the bay itself, the story was murkier. Not everyone believed the escape ended in death. In fact, the first seeds of doubt were planted almost immediately. The raft the men used was never fully recovered. A makeshift paddle was found on a nearby beach. So was a wallet wrapped in plastic containing family photos and contacts, all belonged to the Anglin brothers. Strangely, the photos hadn't been damaged by the water. Some investigators took that as a sign they'd taken care not to get wet. Maybe because they'd made it to land. Over time, reports began to surface, some credible, some laughable. One of the first came from a Norwegian cargo ship that allegedly spotted a body floating in the bay, but no recovery was ever made. In 1965, an anonymous tip claimed the men were living on a farm in Mexico. A few years later, a man claimed he'd met the Anglins in South America while on vacation. He even took a photograph in Brazil in 1975 that showed two men with striking facial similarities to the brothers. That photo still circulates online today, fueling endless debates. Their family never wavered. The Anglin siblings insisted the brothers had survived. They pointed to things most people missed. Every Mother's Day, their mother received flowers, always anonymously, always without a card. She believed they came from her sons. At her funeral, two unknown women in heavy makeup were spotted in the crowd. Some believe it was the brothers in disguise, saying their last goodbye. And then there was the 2018 letter sent to a San Francisco police station. It was written in shaky handwriting and signed by John Anglin. The letter claimed that he had been living under various aliases since the escape. It said that Frank Morris died in 2008, Clarence in 2011, and that John was now sick and ready to surrender, on one condition: he wanted medical treatment in exchange. The FBI tested the letter for fingerprints and DNA. Their conclusion: inconclusive. No match, but also no denial. Of course, for every eerie coincidence, there were hoaxes. People confessed to being the escapees just to gain attention. Others tried to sell fake relics online, claiming they had maps or blueprints used in the escape. Some even wrote books insisting they knew where the men had gone. Law enforcement dismissed most of these claims, but a small task force within the U.S. Marshals Service quietly continued to monitor tips, just in case. The biggest problem wasn't the lack of evidence. It was the flood of it. There were too many conflicting stories. Too many maybes. If the escapees had survived, why had no one credible seen them? Why had they never contacted their family directly? How had they supported themselves all these years? And why hadn't anyone come forward with definitive proof? Some speculated that they were helped by outside accomplices, former inmates, sympathetic guards, or family members. Others believed they had undergone plastic surgery and blended into society, starting over in small towns where no one asked questions. And then there were darker theories, that they were captured, silenced, or used in a covert government operation. With every year that passed, the myth grew. But so did the sense that the truth was just out of reach. Until now. Because in 2025, all those questions are finally being pulled into the light: the rumors, the sightings, the photographs. They may not have been enough on their own. But something has changed. A discovery has been made, one that links fact with fiction, science with mystery. Theories are about to become history, and what investigators have found is more bizarre and more tragic than anyone ever expected. The forgotten echo beneath the bay. It started as nothing more than a routine scan. A private engineering firm had been contracted to assist with an underwater infrastructure project near the Golden Gate Bridge. Their task: to map the seafloor, identify hazards, and check for sediment shifts that might interfere with upcoming installations. It was all procedural, until one of the sonar technicians noticed something strange. At first, it looked like a natural formation, an unusual pocket beneath the layers of mud and silt. But as the scans were cleaned up and rendered in sharper detail, the shape stood out. It wasn't jagged or organic, it was symmetrical. Man-made. Roughly the size of a small cargo container, but unlike anything logged in the area's naval records. The coordinates placed it just over a mile from Alcatraz, resting at a depth of nearly 60 feet. Curiosity turned into investigation. Local authorities were notified, and within a week, divers were sent in to confirm what the scanners had found. Visibility was poor and the currents unpredictable, but after multiple dives, the object was confirmed, a sealed rectangular structure encrusted in marine growth and buried in sediment. Its surface was metallic, and early probing revealed riveted seams and a corroded locking mechanism. It had clearly been down there for decades. There was no official explanation for its presence. No missing shipping records. No sunken vessels reported in the vicinity that matched the object's dimensions. As speculation grew, the project was temporarily halted and turned over to state authorities. By the time a recovery barge was brought in to lift the container, whispers had already begun to circulate among those involved. Some believed it was old military storage. Others thought it might be connected to long-rumored Prohibition-era smuggling routes. No one imagined what they were about to find. The moment the container broke the surface, something felt wrong. It wasn't waterlogged like they expected. It was sealed so tightly that even after 6 decades underwater, the interior remained dry. It took nearly 3 hours to open. When they finally did, they weren't met with equipment or weapons, but something much more chilling. Human remains. 3 bodies, perfectly preserved. They were curled up on the floor, dressed in aged, water-stained clothing consistent with 1960s prison uniforms. Their facial features, though sunken and pale, were clearly visible. One still had a crude raincoat vest wrapped around his torso. Another clutched what looked like a homemade lantern. And the third, a torn scrap of paper still pressed between 2 fingers. A note, barely legible, with one sentence etched in shaking, almost frantic handwriting. "We made it, but we can't leave." Panic swept through the recovery team. The container was immediately sealed again and transferred to a secure facility. DNA tests were ordered. Specialists were brought in. And within days, the confirmation came. The bodies were those of Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, the 3 escapees who had eluded capture for over 60 years. After decades of doubt, speculation, and folklore, the impossible had finally been confirmed. But the real question wasn't how they were identified. It was what they were doing inside a custom-built airtight container on the floor of the San Francisco Bay. Who built it? How did it get there? And why had they sealed themselves inside? The mystery of their survival had just been replaced with something far darker, a puzzle even more disturbing than their disappearance. They hadn't drowned. They hadn't fled to South America. They hadn't vanished into the night. They had hidden in a tomb of their own making. And now, for the first time since 1962, the silence around the Alcatraz escape had been broken. But the story wasn't over, it was just beginning. The mystery solved. The news didn't break in a press conference. It wasn't leaked to the tabloids or hinted at in a podcast. It came through a single official memo, quietly released by the U.S. Marshal Service and cross-referenced with a statement from the California Department of Corrections. The headline read simply, "Alcatraz prisoners found." And just like that, a 63-year-old mystery was over. The forensic analysis had been conclusive. DNA extracted from the preserved remains inside the underwater container matched archived samples from the Morris and Anglin families. Dental records confirmed it further. There was no room left for speculation. These were the men who had once vanished from the most secure prison in the United States. The same men law enforcement had sworn had drowned. The same men conspiracy theorists had claimed were living in South America. They hadn't escaped into the world, they had sealed themselves beneath it. The discovery sent shock waves through both the scientific and criminal justice communities. For decades, the story of the Alcatraz escape had been a mixture of myth and speculation, used in movies, TV shows, and documentaries as the ultimate what-if. Now, in 2025, there was an answer, a real, physical, undeniable answer. But what made this more than just a historical footnote was the method of survival and the tragic failure embedded within it. Experts now believe the 3 prisoners didn't simply build a raft and risk the waters blindly. They had a plan, far more advanced than anyone suspected. The container they had hidden in was a makeshift survival capsule, likely constructed over months or even years. Its internal walls were reinforced with scavenged metal. Crude ventilation shafts had been installed, along with evidence of stored food and a sealed water tank. It wasn't a desperate escape attempt. It was a calculated move. Marine scientists and structural engineers studying the container confirmed that its airtight seal and the frigid underwater environment had preserved the bodies in a way similar to cryonic storage. The bay's oxygen-poor sediment acted like a protective blanket, slowing decomposition to a near halt. They hadn't just disappeared. They had been waiting to be found. And now they were. The most haunting discovery came not from their bodies or clothing but from a set of personal items preserved inside a rusted steel box, a faded photograph of the Anglan brothers as children, a bar of soap carved into a new dummy head, perhaps a 4th decoy that was never used, and a notebook, water-damaged but partially legible, believed to have been written by Frank Morris himself. One page read, "We got out. We beat them. But we can't risk the surface." Another simply said, "This was never the plan." Investigators theorized that something went wrong shortly after they reached the capsule. Perhaps a mechanical failure. Perhaps a delay in their retrieval. Maybe the tides changed or the air supply dwindled faster than they calculated. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. They were trapped inside their own invention. 3 men who had outsmarted Alcatraz, only to be outlasted by time. The phrase that had echoed for decades, "Did they make it?" had finally been answered. Yes, they did. But only for a little while. Scientists finally solved the Alcatraz escape mystery in 2025, not with rumors or blurry photographs, but with cold, preserved truth pulled from the bottom of the bay. The men who had once defied the impossible didn't drown in the waves or fade into the jungle. They stayed hidden. Silent. Waiting for someone to notice. And now that they've been found, we're left with something even more unsettling than mystery. Closure. A conclusion not of freedom, but of tragedy. They made it out of their cells. They just never made it out alive. How they almost got away with it. The biggest shock wasn't that the Alcatraz prisoners had been found, it was how close they came to succeeding. For over 6 decades, the world believed they had either perished in the bay or vanished with the help of accomplices. But the discovery of the airtight underwater chamber changed everything. This wasn't a reckless escape into open water. It was a carefully orchestrated operation with layers of planning no one ever imagined until now. Investigators examining the capsule concluded it wasn't built in one go. It showed signs of incremental construction, likely assembled piece by piece using salvaged materials over the course of many months, possibly years, prior to the escape. Every detail revealed forethought: the reinforced riveted panels, the manual oxygen regulator fashioned from plumbing parts, the insulation lining the inner walls. The capsule wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a fallback, a hidden bunker meant to keep them out of sight until the search died down. And perhaps that was the plan all along. The theory now taking shape is this: the men never intended to flee to the mainland on their raft. It was a decoy, a symbol of escape meant to confuse authorities. After launching it, they circled back using hidden flotation devices and submerged themselves into the capsule anchored in the bay. From there, they could wait, days or even weeks, for the national manhunt to cool off. Then, when it was safe, they'd emerge under the cover of darkness and disappear into the city. It was brilliant. It almost worked. But like every perfect plan, it had one flaw: timing. Experts believe the oxygen system failed first. The chamber wasn't designed for long-term survival. It had no renewable air supply and no fail-safe mechanism for emergencies. Once sealed inside, they were gambling on a fast extraction or ideal conditions. But nothing in the San Francisco Bay is predictable. Strong currents may have shifted the capsule deeper or off course. Visibility could have been zero. And any backup plan, if one existed, never came to fruition. Perhaps they waited too long. Perhaps help never came. Perhaps they knew the tide had turned, and there was no way out. The personal belongings found inside offer more clues. The soap dummy head suggests they anticipated re-entry into the prison area or needed another diversion. The damaged raft remnants point to a possible return trip gone wrong. But the most telling artifact was the notebook, Frank Morris's quiet record of what was supposed to be their final move. His final entry simply read, "Not how we planned it." Authorities have also revealed that the chamber was located within a narrow corridor of sediment that shielded it from earlier sonar sweeps. Had the 2025 infrastructure project not occurred, it may never have been found. Forensic experts called it a needle in the seafloor, just a few more feet in any direction, and it could have remained buried indefinitely. Which raises an unsettling question. How many other secrets lie hidden beneath that same stretch of water? For the families of the escapees, the news brought closure, but also heartbreak. They had always hoped their brothers and sons had survived, even thrived after their escape. Now they know, they survived, just not for long. The public response has been divided. Some see the men as tragic anti-heroes, brilliant but doomed. Others view the discovery as the final nail in the coffin of romanticized prison escapes. But no matter the opinion, one fact remains. They almost got away with it. Had their timing been different? Had their oxygen held just a little longer? Had the current been a little kinder? They might have stepped out of that capsule, climbed ashore, and vanished into history. Instead, they waited in silence beneath the surface. And for 63 years, the Bay kept their secret. The silence that followed, once the news broke, there was no putting it back in the box. Headlines around the world lit up with a sentence that many thought they'd never read: Alcatraz escapees found. It didn't matter that they were dead. What mattered was that they hadn't drowned, hadn't disappeared into myths or far-flung jungles. They had escaped. They had made it. And they had died waiting to live again. The reaction was instant and divided. Some mourned them as tragic figures, symbols of defiance who outsmarted an institution but were ultimately betrayed by the limits of their time. Others were colder, even angry. They were criminals, after all, men who had robbed banks, violated laws, and manipulated a system. Escape should not have been their victory. And yet, there was a strange admiration for the sheer brilliance of their plan. In San Francisco, tourists swarmed Alcatraz once again, but this time not for the usual guided tour. People wanted to see the cells the escapees had left behind. They wanted to walk the path of their disappearance, to stand where history had quietly defied the odds. The museum staff added a new section to the tour, one displaying photos of the underwater capsule, the preserved belongings, and forensic scans that confirmed the identities. A timeline of the 2025 discovery now sits next to the infamous escape map. The U.S. Marshal Service, which had technically kept the case open all these years, quietly marked it closed. There was no press conference, just a formal statement acknowledging the identification and the recovery. No speculation. No emotion. Just facts. But for the families, especially those of the Anglin brothers, it was a moment of quiet devastation. For years, they had held on to hope. Hope their sons and brothers had built new lives somewhere warm, somewhere free. Now they knew the truth, that they hadn't lived past 1962. That they had come so close, only to spend their final moments in the cold, dark, a few miles from home. Frank Morris left no known family. But his notebook, damaged and fragmented, will be preserved in the National Archives. Its final entries have already sparked academic interest from criminologists, engineers, and even psychologists who study high-stakes decision-making. Because this wasn't just a prison break. It was a blueprint of desperation, determination, and absolute trust. In the end, the mystery that held America captive for over half a century was not solved by a confession or a chance sighting. It was solved by sonar, sediment, and silence. A forgotten object at the bottom of the bay revealed more truth than decades of theories ever could. And in that truth lies something unsettling, the idea that sometimes answers don't come when we're looking for them. They come later, when no one expects them. Quiet, grim, and resting where no one thought to look. The story of the Alcatraz escape didn't end with gunfire or a tropical hideout. It ended beneath 60 feet of water, in a container built by men who refused to be forgotten. And for the first time, they no longer are. Subscribe to our channel for more. Thanks for watching.